Hello and welcome back to Dr. Movie Motion. Today we're going to jump straight into a tutorial on how to make this really zen sand simulation. As always, get the file on Patreon for just $3. So I've got Blender 3.3 with screencast keys on the left there, so you can see exactly what I'm clicking and doing. But you can do this in newer versions of Blender as well. We're actually going to keep the cube, but we're going to delete the light. And we're going to start off by modeling the basics of our scene. We're going to add a circle by Shift-A, circle, and we're going to increase the number of vertices to make it better quality. Don't be stingy here. We're going to have way more vertices later, so it doesn't matter. 128 is absolutely fine. Now, Tab to go into Edit mode. Go into wireframe mode by pressing Z and W. And we have this circle. Now I'm going to scale it 2 times. This is going to be the base of our scene. And we're just going to duplicate it, so we have 2 of it. One of them, we're going to call this the sand. And the other one, we'll call the tray. And we're going to model the tray first because that's a little bit simpler. So make sure the tray is selected. In edit mode, we're going to press E to extrude this up. And let's go up about 1 meter. This isn't going to be to real life scale. And let's press E again, S to scale, about 1.1. And then we'll press 1 to look at it from the side view. We'll extrude it in the Z axis until it goes a bit further than the base. So you can see this is the base. And now in solid view, we see that we have the basics of the tray, but it's not filled in. It's kind of hollow at the bottom. So back to wireframe mode and select all of the vertices at the bottom. Or you can press Alt and click here until it selects the ring. And we're simply going to press F to fill. And we'll do the same here. So I'm going to press Alt and click and F. And we have the basics of a tray. We'll just add a tiny little bevel modifier to make it look nicer. So let's see what this looks like in solid view. Let's increase the number of segments. This looks good. Let's shade it smooth so it looks smoother. We can play with this amount to make it a bit more subtle. This is nice. And I'm going to remember these settings because they might be useful later. Now let's select the sand. We're very quickly going to model the sand. So we'll go into edit mode by pressing Tab. We want to see it, so you can either press Z to go into wireframe mode, Z and W, or you can press Alt Z to turn on X-ray. I'm going to do this because it still gives us a bit of the solid shading. We're going to press F to fill, E to extrude, and we're going to extrude it about half of the way up. Now if you go back to normal solid view, so we turn off X-ray, we see what's going to become our sand later on. And we're going to do something very fancy to this sand topology. But first, let's model the rake that's going to move through and stir up our sand. So there's lots of different shapes that you can use for your rake. You can have these little teeth. You can have kind of cylinders that poke down and stir up the sand. We're going to use this. It's very simple. The rake is going to have these like triangles in it. This works really well with the technique we're going to be using for the actual simulation. But if you play around and you manage to get this working with the other shapes, please do share those in the comments below. Now the next step is to make yourself a nice cup of tea. I've got some M&S decaf Earl Grey because it's too late in the day for caffeine for me. But you can't simulate Zen unless you're feeling Zen yourself. So it's important that you feel Zen. Okay, now we're going to turn this cube into the rake. And it's going to have 2 sides to it. One side is going to smooth things over, and the other side is going to make the grooves as it passes over the sand surface. So I like keeping scales applied, and I like keeping the scales constant. So we're going to do all scaling in edit mode. I'm going to press Tab to get into that. And we're going to scale this down a lot. Actually, first, Let's grab it up so that it doesn't sink into the sand when we scale it. So tab into edit mode, scale it in all axes. I'm scaling it to 0.1. We might make this even smaller actually. We're going to scale it down another 0.5. So if you want to do that all in one go, you can scale it by 0.05. And now we're going to scale it in the x-axis to make it the length that we want, roughly. So I think, is 40 too much? It's kind of too tight. I don't want it to be scraping across the tray. That wouldn't be very realistic. So let's scale it 39 in the x-axis. Now we are going to give it the shape on the two sides. So make sure you're still in edit mode. I'm going to press Ctrl R to add a loop cut. And I'm going to right click to leave it exactly in the middle, just so we have a reference, so we can separate the two sides. I'm going to add another loop cut on this side. This is going to smooth things over. And I'm just going to grab this so that it's asymmetrical. So this, we're going to extrude it down. Ooh, no, I didn't mean to have that top vertex selected. So let's unselect it with Control and drawing a boundary. And now we'll extrude it in the z-axis a little bit. We can always play with that height later. And now let's make the kind of sawtooth, which I'm going to call the rake, that's going to make the shape in the sand. So again, tab into edit mode. I want things to be kind of symmetrical, so let's see how far this is from the middle. So I'm going to grab this in the X, and this is about 0.275. So I'm going to make a loop cut. Let's place it here. It's a little bit messy at the moment. But let's grab it in the X, 0.275, and now this is roughly symmetrical between this side and that side. They're both the same distance from the middle. Okay, decide how many teeth you're going to have. I want 8, and then you need that many loop cuts times 2 minus 1. So if I want 8 teeth, I'm going to make 15 loop cuts. 8 times 2 is 16, minus 1 is 15. So Control R, and you can scroll up until you have the right amount. So I only learned this recently, but actually you don't have to count in your head. You can have a look here, number of cuts, and it tells me that I've selected 15, and I right click to keep them centered. Now I'm going to select every alternating set. These are going to become the teeth. So I'm holding Shift and making these selections. And no need to extrude them, we're just going to grab them down and have a look at how far down you extruded this. And you want them to be about twice as deep. Actually, this looks too deep, so I'm going to keep it 0.1, but then this, I'm going to move it up so it's about halfway down the teeth. So grab Z 0.05. Okay, so here we have the basics of the rake that's going to move around and make the shapes in the sand. Let's give it a base in the middle so it's not just floating. That's going to be a cylinder. And again, in edit mode, we're going to scale this down. Let's get it the right height first. Always keeps things simpler if you modify things one at a time. So let's scale it until the height is about right. And that's fine. We're not going to be giving this any real physics settings, so it doesn't matter if it intersects with this geometry. And now in solid view, let's scale and press Shift Z to lock the Z axis until it's the right width. I think this is nice, or a bit wider. No, that's too wide. I don't want it kind of popping out of the side. I want it to be smaller than the rake. So this is good. Actually, the height is wrong. We're going to change that in a second, but that's okay. This is fine. And here, to make this look nicer, let's give it another bevel modifier. So let's give it similar settings to what we used before. 6 segments. And 0.05. So actually, because this is a smaller shape, reducing this hasn't reduced the level of the bevel because it's currently limited by the angle. But it still looks about right actually, so let's shape that smooth. I think this is fine, we'll use this, but you can play with this. If you want it to be less beveled, you have to turn this down even more and keep a close eye on it. This we're just gonna shade smooth. Oh, no. Let's shade it auto smooth. So the caps on the ends are flat, not smooth. Now, the next thing we need to do is give our sand some geometry. And we didn't do this earlier because now we can shape this to match our teeth. And it's going to make the simulation really lightweight and smoother later on. So we'll tab into edit mode, Alt-Z to X-ray, and make sure you've selected just the top ring. Now 7 to go into top view. And actually we'll go into wireframe, and just for the time being, we're going to disable the bevel modifier so we can see exactly where these teeth lie. And we want to create some geometry on the inside of this circle. And there are different ways you could do that. You could delete the face, then extrude it in a little bit. So you could extrude size 0.9 and then repeat that. But that changes size every time, if that makes sense. The first time, let's say you do E to extrude size 0.9 and you shift R to repeat it, you can see that these get closer together, whereas here they're further apart. But actually we want the geometry to align with the sawtooth, and this doesn't give us that. So let's undo all of that. I'm going to do this by insetting. So let's press I to inset. And the first inset, we'll leave it at the edge and we'll ignore that. And then we'll inset again the first sawtooth. And I'm going to keep an eye on the number. So if you look at the top, it says thickness 0.1. I wonder if we do 0.1 exactly. Oh, actually that's too high. 0.1, 0.15, no, 0.105 seems good here. And now when we press Shift R, you can see that every time we inset is doing it by the same amount. And so each of these teeth gets the same amount of geometry, and that's going to make things much easier. When we get to the end, we don't need much geometry here. I will clean things up a little bit because one huge filled face can cause problems. I'm going to delete that face and let's grid fill it. It's a little bit neater. So go to faces and grid fill. We don't need so many, 16, 8. This is fine. Now that we have the geometry set up, we're ready to get started with the simulation. Now, there are lots of ways you could do this. You know me, I love physics simulations, and I love doing physics simulations realistically. So when I first thought about doing this, I wanted to use a huge molecular simulation with 1 million particles or more, where the teeth physically move particles out of the way and it reacts like sand. But as much as I tried, and I tried like tens of experiments, maybe more, I'll show some on the screen now. It just doesn't look very good. So we're going to fake it by using dynamic paint, okay? We're going to go into the physics properties settings. Make sure the sand is selected, and we're going to click dynamic paint. We're going to add a canvas because this rake is going to be the brush, the canvas is going to be this sand. And we're going to change one setting, surface type instead of paint, it's going to be displace. Now, the brush is a little bit more nuanced. So let's select the brush and the cylinder and go into solid view. I'll turn off X-ray so I see things more clearly. And this looks weird because it's on auto smooth, but that's disabled, so that looks much better. I'm going to select these two, and we're going to grab it down until it kind of intersects with the sand, and I'm going to leave it exactly there. So this is going to smooth things out, and it lands just on the surface of the sand. Here, the teeth dig into the sand. And before we give this the settings, we're going to have to split this so that the smoothing section and the toothy section are separate objects. But before we do that, let's set some things up. So in object properties, we're going to add a nice slow rotation over time. So we want the rotation in the z-axis to go like this. I'm going to rotate it clockwise. I think that's a bit more zen, but correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below. And we're going to use drivers for this. I love using drivers, so press hashtag. Oh, hashtag. Hashtag just once. Frame. Now, every frame, this is rotating our rake, but that's way too much. So go back in, divide it by 100, and let's have a look. That's a nice speed, but it's the wrong direction, so we'll add a minus, so minus frame. And this is roughly right. We might slow this down a little more. 1 in 200. Make sure you're saving regularly. I'm going to save now. Anything simulation related or animation related might crash Blender, and you don't want that. This is a nice speed, so I'm going to use this. Now, we're going to split this into two sections, like I mentioned. Before we do that, let's give it a name. So this is going to be visual only, visual, teeth, and level. So that's what I'll call these. These are the teeth, that's the level. Now we'll duplicate it, and we'll tab into edit mode. We will simply delete this geometry, delete all the vertices. We'll fill this to make the geometry nice and clean. And we're going to call this just teeth. I just realized something. This geometry is a bit weird in the end. Oh, actually, that's okay. That's why we're using this object, because this isn't going to be visible later. It's just going to be used for the dynamic paint. So the weird geometry is okay. And actually, we can just disable this because we don't need it. And we'll do the same again for the other side. To get the visual, teeth, and the level, Shift D to duplicate, tab into edit mode, select everything you don't need, X to delete the vertices, fill this, and take off the bevel modifier. Just to stop these looking funky, select them both. So the teeth and this other thing, which we're going to call the leveler. I don't like this inconsistency. Let's make them both V. So select both of these, right click, shade flat, and now it looks a bit less bad. Don't worry about these intersection kind of artifacts. We will hide these from the render. And actually, we might even hide them from the viewport, but we need them for the time being. So let's do this one at a time. Let's start with these teeth and make sure that they leave an imprint on the sand. So select the teeth, go into your physics properties. We're going to add a dynamic paint. And instead of canvas, we're going to switch this to brush and add brush. And let's play this. So you can see already they're starting to make some grooves in the sand. And because of the way that we inset the faces on the top, these lines are really smooth. If you do it differently, you're going to get weird jagged lines here, but we don't have that. They're perfectly smooth. Let's just watch this for a second. Isn't this nice? Even without a render, just watching this, it's just relaxing, isn't it? Oh, our animation is too short. It interrupted my tea break. Let's make this 5,000. If you're clever, you can figure out, because of this thing, you can figure out how long it takes to do a rotation. But I can't be bothered to do any sums. I just want to watch this for a long while. Okay, I think that's enough relaxing. Let's do a few more things. Let us give this even more geometry. So this works really nicely, but here, because of the small number of edges and faces, we're getting these kind of artifacts. We'll kind of hide them later, but I want to make them less pronounced. So let's select the sand, go into your modifiers, and add a subdivision surface. Now, the reason this is very slow is because by default it'll select Capmol Clark. You don't want that, you want simple, and you want this to be above the dynamic paint. It's kind of messed up a little bit because the geometry changed. So I pressed Shift left to go back to the first frame. Let's save, and let's watch this again. So again, we have these really satisfying grooves going through our sand. But this side is cleaner. There's less of that jagged kind of moving. There's still a little bit. I might even increase this to 2, but actually I don't think you really need to. I will do it though, because I just like things to be as smooth as possible. And again, I save. Nice. Okay, we are ready to set up the physics. Can we call them physics? I'm going to call them physics because they're in the physics properties. We're going to set up the physics of the leveler. So again, go into the physics properties, dynamic paint, brush, add brush, and here we're just going to make this an eraser, erase paint. This is going to erase whatever we've done before. And I'm going to go back to the beginning with Shift left, save your scene in case anything crashes, and press space. Just wait for a second, and everything should just work, but I want to check before I move on. And this has broken because we didn't extend the range of the simulation. So select the canvas, which is the sand, and we'll make this 5,000 is probably too long. Let's say 3,000, and we will start the simulation again. We'll keep things quicker for now. I just want to make sure that it works. So I'm going to turn this down to 0, save, and play it. And it should be faster now because there's less geometry. And we'll find out whether the eraser works. And then as long as it does, we can turn the geometry levels, we can turn up the subdivision again for the final scene. Okay, moment of truth. We're going to find out if this does erase the lines. I just want to see the other side of it. And it seems to be working. I see some kind of stuff happening here at the front. And it is leveling them. Isn't this nice? So now that works, let's turn up the vertex count again. Just give it a second to leave the simulation. Select the sand, turn this back on. I wonder if 1 is enough. You know what, I'm going to use 1 because that's plenty, but I'll add a second subdivision surface. which will go after the dynamic paint modifier. And so this isn't going to give it more geometry while it's simulating the dynamic paint, but it will smooth things over. Things will just look nicer afterwards. And I'll leave it as Catmull Clark, not simple. Because we've added a ton of geometry, I'm going to save, Control S. Let's play this a little bit just to make sure things don't crash. And yeah, this looks really nice. So you can see the effect of the Catmull Clark is kind of smoothing things, but there's plenty of geometry there to start with because of this. And so this simulation is going to be perfect. Actually, I'm going to just bake it and get that out of the way. So let's go back to the physics properties, save before you bake anything, cache. And top tip, if you want to use multiple dynamic paint systems, you need to name them. Because if you have different dynamic paint caches with the same name, which is just blank, they're going to mess each other up. I had to learn this the hard way. So let's just name this to get into a good habit. We're going to name this displacement dynamic paint. And let's bake it. And while that's baking, I'm going to show you a reason you might like to use two different systems. I'm not going to use it here because I think it's a bit overkill, and I only discovered this after I made my last video that I'm basing this on. But you could get an even cleaner result by doing something like this Stack Overflow discussion. So what they had is two dynamic paint systems. One pushes down and one pushes up. And that's kind of realistic. Like if you're pushing anything through sand, it's going to move sand out of the way, but the sand is going to go somewhere. So you can see the effect here. Instead of just making a dip, it's going to make a dip, and the second system is going to add this level of buildup around it. Actually, the reason I'm not using this is because it didn't work. So I thought I could get this to work by having a second system that does dynamic paint based on proximity. So mesh plus proximity. So if it's a little bit further away, it pushes the sand up. But it wouldn't work for me. Maybe proximity is broken. You could do something manually yourself by changing the shape of the teeth. But I think the result that we're going to get is good enough. And this doesn't warrant the extra complexity. Okay, the dynamic paint is done. Let's have a look at it. So we only simulated 3000 frames. So let's make our Blender scene match. Not 300, 3000. And let's have a look at this. You can see it does exactly what we want. So the rakes go through, create these lovely lines, and the leveler smooth them out again. I'm going to add one little element that's going to make things more realistic, and that's these mounds that are in front of them. So if you look at a real video of this, you can see that the sand or the powder kind of piles up as it's being pushed around. Now, I tried lots of ways to get this. I posted a poll on my channel of one way to get these mounds, I call them. And the way I achieved the video in that poll is I had a particle system. So these things would fire off particles. The particles would increase the depth. And so it would lead to this build-up. But because it's particles and it's kind of random, it looked noisy and jittery. But I think I found a better solution. And that is, again, to fake it. We're going to fake those mounds by adding a cylinder. So Shift A, add mesh, cylinder. And we're going to rotate it 90 degrees in the y-axis, not in the x-axis. Then object mode, let's grab this over here. And now in edit mode, actually let's move it up first so that the center is roughly where we want it. And now in edit mode, let's look at this in solid view. We'll scale this down, but locking the x-axis, so press Shift Z. And that is roughly right. Now this doesn't look very realistic, but we'll get to that. So in X-ray mode, grab this in the x-axis until it roughly matches. And the same for this. So we only want it when the actual leveler is there. So let's turn off X-ray so we can see more clearly. We'll grab it in the x-axis, and roughly there is right. And now let's save this so we can use it on the other side. So we're going to duplicate it and just move it off to the side for the time being. And now we can start to shape this. So if you look at a real life one of these, there's more of this build up. There's a bigger mound on the outside, probably because this arm is moving more quickly there and it's less pronounced on the inside. So let's give it this effect. Let's scale this side, but locking the X. So Shift X, roughly like this. Let's add some loop cuts. So Control R, we'll add a couple. And this will just give us some control so we can shape it exactly how we want. Let's taper it off at the end so it's not this weird cone kind of shape. So select the end over here, S, Shift X, and scale it down a little bit. Scale this up a little bit just to get the kind of shape that I want. This is very much an art, not a science. Let's shade auto smooth. And I think this is looking roughly right. Once you have this, give it some rotation, because again, if you look at a real one of these, as the arm sweeps past, it moves the particles in a rotating kind of manner. We will apply the rotation, Control A, apply rotation, and now it should be one of these. So you can see it here, it's rotating in the axis that we want. And I want it to rotate in this direction. So as the arm comes past, it pushes sand up and over, and it comes around like this. Let's do this with a driver. I like my drivers. So hashtag minus frame, because we want it to go that direction. Well, that looks pretty good. But actually, I suspect it's much too fast. Yeah, it just looks right because it's moving like more than a whole rotation every frame, or more than a segment every frame, so it looks like it's moving smoothly. Let's divide it by 20. Yeah, so now I think what we're seeing here is the real rotation speed. It's still a touch fast, so let's divide by 40. And yeah, we want this kind of slow churning as it moves around. Let's go back to the first frame and let us parent this to the actual thing that moves around. Let's parent this, and we'll parent it to the visual rotating section. So I selected first this cylinder, then Control selected the visual object, and Control P. Object, keep transform, and let's see. So it's rotating around with it, which is exactly what we want. Let's just check it's rotating. Yeah, and you also get this churning rotation. Lovely. Now let's copy this over for the other side. So let's go back to the first frame, top view. Let's change the pivot point to the 3D cursor. Make sure it's exactly in the middle. If it's not, Shift S, cursor to world origin. So let's duplicate this, rotate it around the pivot point, which is the 3D cursor, 180. And now we have the same thing on the other side. I'm just going to check that it rotates in the right direction. So I'll shade flat. And yeah, it's in the right direction. Let's go back to shade auto smooth. Now, you could leave it here. I'm going to show you something I added in the previous one just to give it a nice little extra bit of realism. But we're not going to take it all the way because it's going to take too much time. But I'm just going to show you that to make it a little more realistic, when I have these mounds in front of the teeth, I shaped the cylinder like this so that it's a bit more realistic. Around each tooth, you have its own separate mound that builds up. And you can do that with more loop cuts and just playing around until it looks about right. But I will show you something else, which is I wanted these to be more dynamic. I wanted them to change a little bit over time. So I added a modifier, displace, added a new texture. This looks completely messed up, but we're going to go down into this texture here. Not image or movie, we'll do clouds. You can see it's adding a little bit of randomness. And we're going to change the effect it's going to have by reducing the contrast until you get just this nice subtle bit of randomness. If you want, you can add some geometry here again by adding a subdivision before this texture. But what I did is really simple. Just have this texture driving some displacement, and then I keyframed this size. So gradually over time, the shape of this noise gradually shifted around, and I thought it gave it a nice level of realism. It looks a bit more like a real bunch of sand that's being pushed around. To keep things simple for this tutorial, I'm going to leave that off. Okay, next thing we need to do is the materials. So save your scene if you haven't already. Press Shift A to add a mesh. This is just going to give us a nice floor. Let's add it, underneath the tray. Scale it up. And actually this tray is a bit too high, so I'm going to select everything at the top. And I'll grab it down. So it's about the same level of the arms that sweep round. So 0.4 minus. This is maybe too low. Let's bring it up. I do want it to match this arm. I think that's neat. So 0.05. And that's nice. So we're going to build a bunch of really simple materials. I'll do the simple ones first. Then I'm going to do the sand material, which also requires a bit of geometry nodes and instancing to get it realistic. Let's start with this. So I'll go into the shading tab. Press 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to make sure we are in cycles, which we weren't. GPU compute. And I don't want my screen recording to start stuttering. So I am going to limit the number of samples, maybe even 8. And we'll build a very basic kind of concrete material. It's just going to be something that's better than a gray, okay? So I'm going to call this basic concrete. We'll go into rendered view. If you don't have Node Wrangler enabled, I'd recommend it. It's included in Blender. Just go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and look for Node Wrangler, and you can enable it. We are going to add a nice HDRI to keep things looking good. I have the Polyhaven asset browser. So let's turn this into an asset browser. Even if you don't have the paid plugin, you can go on Polyhaven, look for the same HDRI I use, if you'd like, or look for another one, and you can import it into your scene absolutely free. I want to use the same HDRI that I used in the clip that I showed you, and that was called Artist's Workshop. Okay, now that it's loaded, let's look for Artist's Workshop, sorry. It's indoors. I should narrow things down. Artist Workshop, we're going to drag this in. If you don't have the plugin, you can do the same thing. Go to Color, select here, and select Environment Texture, that's right there. And then you navigate to the file that you downloaded from the Polyhaven website. But I'm just going to drag this in, and it's going to work straight away like that. Let's save our progress. So let's finish this basic concrete material. I'll move my camera so that the background isn't visible. I'm going to add a noise texture and plug it into the base color. because we have Node Wrangler enabled, Control T gives you these mapping things which are handy. We're going to duplicate this noise texture and plug it right here. So earlier on in the texture coordinate pipeline, press F3, we're going to add a color ramp and plug it here. So let's make our camera wider. So I want it close but wide so we can see more of the table. So let's change the focal length to 22. We can make this even bigger. I don't like having background in the video a lot of the time. Obviously every scene is different, but here I just want to see the table. So we'll move kind of here. And we'll play with this until it looks better. I like to keep things simple. We're going to play with these from the top to bottom, left to right. So we're going to play with the parameters of this noise texture and this noise texture. Start with this. I think it's too big at the moment. Let's make things smaller. This is roughly the kind of scale I want. Let's have a look at detail. Usually detail looks better when it's high, but it hasn't made much of a difference. Actually, it has made a bit of a difference, so I'll keep it high. I think it'll make more of a difference here. Let's look at the roughness. Yeah, I like more roughness. This is good. What about distortion? Nope, it was better without it. Now let's have a look at this. I'm going to increase the contrast just so I can see the effect that I'm having more clearly. But I'll probably turn this down later. This is just to get the right shape of the noise. Okay, what scale do we want here? Ooh, I'm liking this. What about detail? Crank it up. Roughness. I suspect actually here lower might be better. Yeah, and do we want any distortion here? No, it's kind of washed it out. Yeah, I'm actually really happy with this. I might even keep this contrasty look. Maybe turn it down a little bit. Yeah, this will do. We're not going to overcomplicate it. We're going to follow a really similar principle for the tray and the arms material. So let's bring in this basic concrete. Instead of just fake user, just because I like knowing my materials aren't going to disappear, we'll copy it. And we'll call this basic tray material. Now we're going to take this same nice texture that we created earlier, but we're going to plug it into the roughness instead of the material. Let's actually close this. Maybe that's slowing things down, I'm not sure. Okay, we're going to unplug this. Now we get a boring white material. Let's make it black because I think that suits this material and it's going to show us the effects of the roughness more clearly. We're going to plug this color into the roughness. And you can see already it gives it a really nice texture. I think this is too rough. So this white, it's giving it a roughness of 1, which is very, very rough. So I'll turn it down into something like 0.4. Yeah, something like this. And what I did before, what you would do if you wanted to give this the absolute best look that you could, is go through and tweak all of these again to get just the right texture for this material. But for our purposes, this is fine. I don't want this to turn into a materials tutorial. Let's just give the same material to the visual teeth and leveler. This is going to be basic tray material. And the same for the cylinder in the middle. And we don't need these anymore, so we can hide them from the scene. The ones that we used for the physics. So hide those, and we're already getting a cleaner look. So next up is the material for the actual sand. Now this is based off of the sand tutorial by Bad Normals. So check that out if you want to see another way of creating sand, but it's my own little twist on it. So let's select this sand first, and we're going to instance sand particles on top of it. Okay, we're going to go into geometry nodes. Let's come out of render view, just because Blender remembers your viewport shading per workspace. So if we go back, it's going to take a while to render. So in the geometry nodes workflow, we're going to add a new set of geometry nodes. And we're going to do a few things. Let's start with Shift A, search, distribute points on faces. You can see the surface has been replaced by these points. We'll replace this with Poisson instead of random. And I like having this maximum distance, which we'll play with later. For now, let's turn this up to 1,000. Okay, and we're starting to get something. Let's add a new node. This is going to be point radius, set point radius. This is going to allow us to control how big they are. So they became smaller. We can make them really big. I think this is roughly right for now. We'll play with it later. And we still want the original geometry of the sand. So we're going to do Shift A, join, not join strings, join geometry. So we're going to join these points geometry with the actual geometry that we have from the surface. And now you can see our surface has popped up. It's there underneath the particles. Let's do a few more things to make this look better. We're going to add some randomness to the size of the points. So if I Shift A, search, random value, and we can plug this straight into here, and we can play around with this. But something I learned from bad normals, and we're going to do the same thing here, is keeping this in a nice range that's easy to visualize, 0 to 1, but we're going to divide this by a big number. So we'll add a math node. Math node here. We're going to divide all of these. Let's try 100. Yeah, and you can see they get back into a normal range, and they still have this randomness. There's some small things here, some big things there. Actually, I don't want a huge range. I don't want them to go from like 0 to the maximum size, if that makes sense. So I'm going to reduce this. And this means the smallest one is only going to be half the size of the biggest one, which is more like real sand. I think the size is good. We'll need much more particles, but let's do that later after we have set up a material for them. Okay, let's go back to the shading workspace. We're going to make 2 materials. And actually, to make things simpler, they're both going to be based off the same noise that we already have. So we'll duplicate this, and we'll call it sand grains. Let's give it a fake user because we're going to make another one now. So that material has 0 users. I don't want it to disappear. And then sand surface and save your scene. And again, give this fake user just so you don't forget and the scene crashes and things disappear. Let's make the surface first. So because we are in the shading workflow, workspace, this is going to be straightforward. Let's press Z and R to go into rendered view. Now we're not going to change the roughness, but we're going to use this noise to change the color. I'm going to check this so that the highlighting isn't there. And we can see it much more clearly. And this is looking very much like a granite kind of rocky material, which is kind of what I was going for in the previous materials. I am going to crank up these scales, and that should make it look finer and more granular like sand. And actually we're going to remove one of these, so Control X removes it. And replace it with object for now. So object is going to plug into there. And we'll increase this a lot. You can see at high scale, just looking more granular and sandy. I liked that, I think. Let's have a think about these. Yeah, I'm going to turn detail down so it's less kind of dirty and rocky, and it's more granular, like grains of sand. What about roughness? I don't see any difference, so we're going to leave that. Distortion, I don't like that, so we'll keep that as 0. Now, we're going to have noise textures driving two different things. We're going to firstly drive the hue. So we're going to change this from black to a nice yellow material. Not that yellow, more like that. Yeah. And we're separately going to drive the brightness of the sand. The way we're going to do that is with a second set of nodes here. So press Shift A. We're going to add a mix RGB node. Instead of a mix, it's going to multiply. And we're going to multiply it by a dark color, and you can see it makes it darker. But we're not going to do it uniformly, we're going to do it randomly based on a noise texture. To keep things simple, you can just plug this into that. But I find that's not super realistic because it just makes things darker depending on where they are on this color ramp, if that makes sense. I want these to be two very different levels of noise. But if you do this, they'll stay, it's the same as one noise pattern. So I'm going to duplicate this, plug it into the same mapping nodes, and I'm just going to change it a little bit. And this isn't going to have a huge effect on how it looks, but it's going to change where this noise is. And so now when we plug this in, it's going to give the noise a different pattern of darkness. So you see here is dark, here is dark. It's different from the darkness we had earlier. It's too strong at the moment, so we'll turn it down by increasing this. And I think this is too saturated, and also the whole thing is too dark. Let's make this lighter. Yeah, that is better. Let's give it a bit more range. You can play with this until it looks right for your scene. Yeah, this is looking better, more creamy, more natural, and this is good. So let's actually copy these nodes into the sand grains. So sand grains, and we'll ignore this stuff and we'll paste it here. Now we need to make sure that the grains use this material. So let's leave render view, go back to geometry nodes. We're going to add a node here, set material. So Shift A, search for material, and you want set material, plug that in here. And these points, these sand grains, are going to have the sand grains material. Save it. Go back to shading view. And actually, you know what? While we're in geometry nodes, let's set the material for the surface to be sand surface. And now I think we can play around with this and it won't change what's being displayed. We're currently changing the sand grains material. Let's go to Z rendered view. And you can see a bit of variation in these points. But actually there's like randomness on the surface of each grain, which isn't exactly what we want. You want each grain to look different from the others. So we're going to add a level of randomness here within point info. So actually in the bad normals video, he used this random to generate a random material for each sand grain. That didn't work for me here, and I suspect it's because the surface mesh is changing with every frame. So actually, as my sweeper, as the rake went around, my colors were jumping around. So we're going to fake randomness by plugging this position node into this. Let's exaggerate the difference a little bit just so you can see what I'm talking about. Yeah, you can see that each whole particle is a different color from the others. There's not some weird texture on the surface of the particles. Let's make this more subtle. Save our scene. We're going to change this into a geometry nodes editor actually. This will allow us to change everything from the same workspace. And here, we're going to make the particles more dense. Let's increase it by a factor of 10. Okay, this is looking better. Let's assign the same setup to these because they should have it. They're going to be sand after all. So add a modifier, where's geometry nodes? It is here. And we're going to use the same setup we have earlier. We'll do this for the same cylinder over here. Geometry nodes, give it the same setup. And essentially, this is going to be a exercise in tweaking things until they look best. So let me show you a few of the things that you can play around with, but it will be down to you to play around to find what looks best for what you're trying to go for. So increasing this number blindly just takes more and more time, and it starts to waste more and more compute resources because these are overlapping. So we're going to be more efficient by having this minimum distance. So you can see that's helped a little bit. And I like that, but I think some of these gaps are too big. I wonder if that's because of the maximum distance or this number. So let's double the number. And there are gaps that are still a little bit too big. So let's reduce this a little bit. Not a lot, down to 0.007. Yep. And that's it, that's the basics. But you know what? Let me share the exact node setup from the video at the beginning so you can replicate it exactly if you'd like. So this is the scene that I've spent much longer on. This is the grain material. So feel free to screenshot this. These are some other sand materials I was playing around with. Feel free to play around with these and share your results in the comments below. This is the surface material. These are the materials in case you want them. And here, I'm just using this to drive displacement. Oh, that's another thing you can do to add a little bit of realism, is to add some displacement to the surface material. Yeah, you can copy this exactly if you'd like. And here is the geometry node setup. Let's make things a little smaller. I'm going to delete the unnecessary stuff. And that's the setup. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful and interesting. I'd love to see what you come up with based on this theme of like a Zen garden that's automated and running itself for you. So please do share what you come up with in the comments down below. Again, get this on Patreon for just $3 if you'd like to see the exact file and tinker and play around with it. Like the video if you've liked it, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.